I entered the crowded divorce courtroom where my daughter-in-law sat cross-legged, her lips curling in defiance.
Embrace the AI revolution. Drive your creativity with Vidna's cutting-edge AI tools.
Whispers flowed through the crowd like waves. Yet I, the mother who had watched her son lose his legs in a work accident, felt a surge of anger coursing through my veins. She had betrayed the man who once protected her and now dared to claim the very house he had built with his sweat and tears. I clenched my grip on the leather briefcase and marched straight into the stunned silence. The judge paused, eyes wide. "Mrs. Evelyn Hartwell, why are you here?" I placed the briefcase on the table, my gaze fixed steadily on her. "Justice," I whispered quietly, "has finally awakened." She had no idea what secrets lay inside that case, ready to ignite the entire courtroom and her entire world. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave adds a new mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. My name is Evelyn Hartwell. I am 66 years old, once one of the most renowned female attorneys in Chicago before I left the profession nearly 2 decades ago. People used to call me the Iron Lady of Justice until a case manipulated by money and power shattered my faith in the very system I had dedicated myself to. I stepped away from law, living quietly in a suburban home with my son Nathan, the child I raised alone after my husband left. I believed I had laid down every weapon, but life always finds a way to pull you back, especially when someone dares to threaten the one sacred thing. I have family. That morning, the courtroom was packed, sunlight slanting through frosted glass onto the aged wooden bench. The murmur of spectators rippled through the room and quickly quieted when Judge Arturo Delgado entered and tapped his gavel. I sat beside Nathan, my son, feeling his hand tremble in mine. Those hands had once been steady enough to lift steel beams, weighing tens of pounds, but now they only carried the faint warmth of a man struck down mercilessly by life. Sitting across the aisle, Bianca, my daughter-in-law, occupied her place at the defense table as if it belonged to her. She crossed her legs, her deep red heels tapping the floor in a mocking rhythm. Her chestnut waves were perfectly styled, and her fitted dress exuded a cold, calculated confidence. Behind her, her family sat, her mother, father, and a younger brother, each wearing the smug expression of those convinced that the outcome is already decided. Bianca's lawyer, Camille Easton, a woman around 35, stood with the composure of someone certain she'd already secured victory. Her voice resonated clearly through the room. "Your Honor," she began, "my client, Mrs. Bianca Cruz, seeks a divorce from Mr. Nathan Hartwell and requests an equitable division of the marital home as a lawful marital asset." She paused briefly, casting a faint look of pity at Nathan before continuing. "After a workplace accident, Mr. Hartwell was no longer able to work and could no longer fulfill the roles of husband or father." Each word struck like a blade. I felt Nathan's shoulders twitch. He dropped his head, jaw clenched so tightly that I could see a blue vein throbbing at his neck. I placed my hand over his, giving it a small, reassuring squeeze. Inside, anger surged. But after years spent in courtrooms, I knew that anger only plants seeds in the ground. I took a deep breath, picked up my pen, and began noting the flaws in their argument. Behind us, whispers started to rise. Some people had recognized me. "Is that Evelyn Hartwell? She was a legend in Chicago," I heard, though I didn't turn. "I once vowed to leave this world forever after a case had cost me everything, my reputation, my faith, and even my marriage. But today I understood I couldn't stay on the sidelines." When Judge Delgado looked up, his gaze settled on me. "Mrs. Evelyn Hartwell, is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor. I am here as legal counsel for my son, Mr. Nathan Hartwell." The room buzzed like surf crashing against rocks. I opened my well-worn leather briefcase, took out the signed authorization and court acknowledgement, and handed them to the clerk. Delgado examined them carefully, then looked up with an expression that blended respect and caution. "Are you sure you want to handle this case yourself?" he asked. I responded simply, "I've let others speak for too long. It's time I speak the truth." Camille let out a small laugh. tinged with disdain. I didn't expect you to still be interested in the case after so many years of silence, she said. I turned toward her with a thin, blade like smile. I didn't come back for interest, I replied. I came back for justice. Silence settled over us. Delgado cleared his throat, attempting to restore formality. He lightly rapped on the gavel and announced a 10-minute recess to verify my legal representation. I returned to the bench and looked at Nathan. His eyes were moist, filled with shame and pain. I softly said, I'm here now, Nathan. You're not fighting alone. He nodded, lips moving silently. In his eyes, I saw something shatter and something ignite, a faint glimmer of hope amid the destruction. Bianca's annoyance was evident. She leaned back, arms crossed, whispering something to her attorney. I couldn't catch the words, but I recognized the expression she directed at me. A mixture of arrogance and fear, a look I was intimately familiar with from decades in court. When the hearing resumed, Delgado confirmed my representation. Camille objected, but he responded concisely. Mrs. Hartwell is a former member of the Illinois Bar. Her credentials are still valid. A dry chuckle escaped Bianca, but it quickly faded when our eyes met. I saw her face change, losing the earlier easy confidence. I quietly proclaimed, I believe justice will not be mocked. Today I intend to prove it. Bianca curled her lip, mocking. Justice? At your age, that's just an old story. I remained silent, a smile unchanging. Perhaps. But the old stories are often the ones that keep people awake at night. The courtroom held its breath. Delgado observed us before nodding to signal the start of the next presentation. Camille reiterated the divorce demands, including medical proof of Nathan's injury, photographs of his legs in casts, and reports indicating a reduction in income. I listened quietly, noting every week's detail. They seemed intent on constructing an image of a crippled, useless man to justify greed and betrayal. When Camille finished, Delgado turned to me. Mrs. Hartwell, would you like to speak today? I stood up and gently tapped my pen on the file in front of me. Your Honor, their evidence is riddled with gaps, but I will reserve my response for tomorrow when the truth can be brought to light. I closed the briefcase, the snap echoing through the room. All eyes turned toward me, the silver haired woman with a calm gaze and steady voice, burning internally like a fire. The hearing concluded with Judge Delgado's decision to recess and allow additional evidence to be verified. I rose, gathered my files, and looked at my son, trying to steady himself on weakened legs. I walked over and murmured, Now go rest. Tomorrow, everything changes. Across the aisle, Bianca clutched her handbag and forced a smile, her lips trembling. She hadn't realized yet that the game had shifted into my hands, the same hands that once authored arguments capable of making Chicago hold its breath. And within the briefcase I carried were items that could overturn the entire case, evidence that wouldn't just cost her everything, but would also demand repayment from the reputation she believed she could buy. My son's divorce trial had only just begun. But for me, this marked the final battle of my life, not merely to reclaim a house, but to seek justice for a mother who had remained silent for too long. I have often wondered why some wounds refuse to heal after decades, perhaps because they aren't in the flesh. They are etched into memory, buried deep until someone stirs them, sweeping away the dust. I still remember that autumn night when my husband Martin placed his dinner knife down and spoke in a hollow tone as if reading a memo. Evelyn, I'm leaving. I suddenly found myself facing a different path in life. I froze in the kitchen, ladle in hand, unable to grasp what I had just heard. On the table, the stew I had been cooking all day still steamed, its spices mingling with the lingering smell of his cigarette smoke. Nathan, only 10 years old then, sat at the end of the table with wide eyes, watching as his father grabbed a suitcase that was evidently packed in advance. The door swung open, and the headlights from a car in the driveway cast a shadow across the tiles like a tear in the night. I couldn't utter a word. I could only watch his figure recede toward the road to the suburbs, where a mansion belonged to a wealthy widow. People said she had inherited a real estate company. But to me, she was just the woman who took away my child's home. Nathan ran after him, crying and calling out, but the engine swallowed every sound. That night, I stayed beside my boy, listening to the rain drum on the tin roof. He buried his face in a pillow, shoulders trembling. I stroked his hair and pressed my lips together to hold back tears. If I were to collapse, what would he cling to? I whispered a single sentence so softly it was almost like air. As long as I have you, I'll stand. I kept that promise for 30 years. The months that followed were a relentless sequence of exhausting days and obstinate nights. During the day, I worked as a bookkeeper at a small firm on Chicago's South Side. In the evenings, I did the accounts for a corner store, then a sewing shop, anything to earn a few extra dollars to pay for rent and tuition. Every morning, I biked Nathan to school, sometimes waiting on flooded stretches of road, clothes soaked, fingers numb, yet his laughter gave me strength. Nathan was my refuge. He studied diligently, never once complaining. When other children's fathers came to pick them up, he would adjust his backpack and say, "It's okay, Mom, it's just us." I can't count the countless all nighters we spent over textbooks. All I remember is the sound of morning bells ringing. I would secretly glance at his sleepy face and reassure myself, this will be worth it. In high school, he dreamed of becoming a civil engineer. I understood it wouldn't be easy. College tuition back then was higher than half a year's worth of my income, but I refused to give up. One afternoon, he noticed his wedding ring was missing from the small wooden box. "Mom, where's Dad's ring?" I smiled and spoke softly, controlling my voice. "I traded it for a chance at your future." That night, I heard him crying in his room and I chose not to go in. Some tears need to fall on their own to help a person grow. Then, on a day in April, Nathan burst through the door, clutching a white envelope, breathless. "I got in, Mom. Illinois Tech accepted me." I froze for a moment, then pulled him into a tight hug. After nearly a decade, I wept with joy. In college, Nathan studied and worked in construction. He wasn't afraid of the sun or mud, and gradually they began trusting him with more significant tasks. I still sent support money, even if it was only a few dozen dollars a week. During his visits home, he would tell me, "Mom, I'll pay everything back soon, I promise." And he kept his word. After graduating, Nathan joined a prominent construction company and quickly advanced thanks to his discipline and determination. I remember the day he took me to see a suburban plot, the same area where we used to pass by and admire houses illuminated from a distance. He said, "I want us to have a place we can truly call home, Mom." We saved every dollar and forwent every luxury. On weekends, I brought lunch to the site. Sweat beaded on his forehead, but he smiled. "Just a few more months and you'll have your own home." When the small two-story house was completed, Nathan handed me the keys. His hands were calloused, arms tanned from the sun, and his eyes shone with pride. "Mom, I promise, no one will ever throw us out again." I stood in the living room, surrounded by the scent of fresh paint, tears streaming down my face. For the first time in years, peace felt tangible. I placed a small photo on the wall, showing the two of us outside our old apartment as a memento of how far we had come. During those initial evenings in the new house, I would sit on the porch, listening to the crickets under the quiet sky. Inside, Nathan would softly play jazz music and lie on the couch. There were no more arguments, no silhouettes walking out into the darkness. It was just the two of us, with the feeling that life had finally granted a fragment of fairness. I began to think that the old pain had purchased today's tranquility. Nathan told me he wanted me to stop working and rest. I only chuckled, unsure if I truly knew how to rest. Yet deep down, I felt the struggle was finally over. I bought a lavender pot for the kitchen window. Every morning, sunlight would pass through the glass and cast a faint purple hue on the wall, like a blessing. Nathan would tease, "Growing peace, huh?" I would smile. "Peace grows quickly if you know how to nurture it. Life drifts easily, like a summer river." Nathan met Bianca at a construction seminar. She was young, lively, sweet. So sweet that even I liked her. When they married, I believed he had finally found what he had missed in childhood. In the early years, I watched them laugh in the kitchen, talk about having a baby, and felt the weight lift from my shoulders. Then Lily was born with her father's bright eyes, and the house was soon filled with laughter. I believed my life had come full circle, from loss to renewal. But I was mistaken. The sense of growth I felt was merely a thin layer of soil covering a hidden ravine. Tiny cracks began to appear in ordinary places, late night calls, unannounced visits, Bianca's sidelong glances whenever I inquired about money, all of these signs hinting at trouble. I never imagined that the happiness I guarded with my youth would be shattered by the very woman I had once called daughter. However, that is a story for a later time. In that moment, in the first house my son built with his own hands, I still believed peace was real, even if it was only the calm before an inevitable storm. The accident occurred on a morning that seemed as ordinary as any other. Nathan had left early with the lunch I had prepared. I stayed behind to tidy up and start dinner. At 7:30 a.m., the phone suddenly rang. I remember the tone, long, persistent, and when I answered, a trembling voice said, "Mrs. Hartwell, I am the site supervisor, Nathan." He had been electrocuted. EMS was rushing him to the hospital. I went numb, my body feeling drained of blood. The phone slipped from my hand, smashing onto the floor with a loud crack. Images flooded my mind. His smile that morning, his promise to be home for dinner, the glint of excitement in his eyes as he talked about a new project. I grabbed my keys and dashed out like someone who had lost grip on reality. At the hospital, the corridor stretched out beneath harsh fluorescent lights. The smell of disinfectant made me feel sick. When the doctor emerged, I saw the seriousness in his eyes before he spoke. The shock hadn't claimed his life, but the fall from the scaffolding, more than 30 feet high, had caused severe damage to his legs. Nerves and muscle tissue were affected. He might still walk, but he would need crutches for the rest of his life. It felt like a knife slicing through my chest. The words "for life" echoed painfully. I nodded, maintaining my composure, but as I glanced through the window and saw his legs wrapped from thigh to ankle, tears overwhelmed me. For 3 days, I remained by his bedside. When Nathan finally woke, his first question was, "Mom, can I go back to work?" I squeezed his hand, smiling with a broken heart. "We'll retrain, son. I'm right here," I assured him. I learned everything the nurses could teach me: how to massage, stretch muscles, and position the cane at the correct angle. Each day, I stood beside his bed, gently lifting his leg inch by inch, softly counting. After the nurses left, I washed him, changed his bandages, and quietly placed notes around the house. "Don't give up. You still have your mom." At first, Bianca visited irregularly. She brought chicken soup, fruit, and even arranged flowers near the window. Whenever anyone entered, she took Nathan's hand and whispered, "I'll always be with you, no matter what." I wanted to believe her. I looked at them and saw my younger self with Martin faith still unbroken. But faith is a delicate thread, easily snapped with a single sigh. The day Nathan was discharged, I arranged a room for him on the first floor and installed extra handrails along the hallway. Our once quiet house was now filled with the tap tap of crutches every morning. During the initial meals after his return, Bianca still smiled and checked on him, even feeding him bites. But within a few weeks, that smile disappeared. One evening, as I brought a plate of fish to the table, Bianca glanced at her phone and frowned. "I need to step out for a bit. You two go ahead and eat." Nathan remained silent. When the door closed, I heard his spoon touch the plate with a soft clink. "Mom, she's probably tired. She has a lot on her plate." I didn't answer. I simply looked at my son, saw him attempt to smile, and noticed the sadness in his eyes like a winter lake. Meal times became heavier. Bianca started leaning on excuses: work, friends, a personal project. I never could tell what was true, only that Nathan spoke less and less. Many mornings, I would find him sitting on the porch with a cold cup of coffee, watching cars pass by. One June afternoon, when Nathan mentioned he wanted some fresh air in the yard, I offered to ask Bianca to help push his chair. She was in the bathroom doing her makeup, and her voice drifted out. "He doesn't need me. You can take him." I paused for a moment, then quietly took the initiative myself. I helped him into the yard and spread a small blanket on the grass. Nathan looked around and managed a forced smile. "It's okay, Mom. She just needs some time." I returned her smile, but inside it felt as if a stone was pressing against my chest. Small signs began to appear. Calls cut short when I walked past, a strange perfume lingering in the car, and a receipt from a fancy restaurant I happened to find in Bianca's coat. I said nothing, knowing from my years of experience that evidence often speaks more clearly than feelings. Then, one morning at the market, I overheard two neighbors chatting near the flower stall. That Hartwell wife, one said. I saw her with some guy at the corner cafe. They felt genuinely cozy, unlike colleagues, the other had remarked. The tall man, dressed in a gray suit. That's him. He drove a stylish car. I stood behind them, clutching my tote until the green onion snapped. Without a word, I continued on my way. That night, when Bianca returned home, I prepared dinner as usual. She took a few bites and pushed the plate aside. The fish is a little fishy, Mom. I just replied, yeah, probably because I bought it late. But inside, doubts were forming a clear picture. I began taking note of when she left, who called her, and when she came back. Not to control her, but because my instincts told me a storm was coming. I recognized that look before. The one of someone searching for an escape from a relationship, not with honesty. Around midnight one night, I was making tea when I heard whispers from Lily's room, my granddaughter. Bianca's voice was gentle, yet sharp as a blade. Do you remember what I told you? Tomorrow, if the teacher asks, you say you want to live with me. Got it? You cannot remain with a sick person indefinitely? Lily's voice was faint and hoarse. I don't want to lie. I love Dad. Bianca's tone became assertive. If you don't listen, we'll lose everything. Is that what you want? I stood in the hallway, my heart pounding inside my chest. My hand trembled around the teacup, the hot liquid burning down my wrist. Watching a mother forcing her 8-year-old to lie for custody made me want to burst out and scream. But I couldn't. I stepped back into the darkness. Every skill I had gained from years as an attorney flooded back, cold and precise. I understood everything. I had just caught the first signs of a legal scheme, carefully devised to seize not only assets, but also the child. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room beneath a soft yellow lamp. Nathan was tossing and turning, his legs jerking in pain, his face gaunt, skin pale from medication. I wanted to wake him and tell him everything, but I held back. He had endured enough. I wouldn't add to his suffering. Instead, I reached for my old leather notebook, the one I had put aside years ago, and began jotting down details, dates, times, words, expressions. I was no longer just a mother. I had reverted to being a lawyer, collecting evidence for a case I hadn't yet taken to court. The next morning, I brewed coffee and settled on the porch. Bianca stepped out, impeccably dressed, lips painted a vivid red, her scent overwhelming. She offered a thin smile. I'll pick up Lily after school and have dinner with a friend. Don't wait up. I simply nodded. Go ahead, Bianca, and take care of yourself. She looked up briefly, surprised for a moment, then turned and walked away. Once her car rounded the corner, I took a sip of the bitter coffee, my hands resting on the open notebook. The sun was shining brightly outside, but inside I felt only cold. I understood that the storm had truly begun, and this time I wouldn't allow it to erase what I had already lost once before. Because this fight was not merely about dividing a house, it was about protecting the essence of the child bearing the Hartwell name, the only one in this household who still understands the difference between honesty and deception, genuine affection and manipulation. And I, the one who once declared, as long as I have my child, I will stand firm, now found myself needing to reaffirm that vow, not only for Nathan, but also for Lily. That afternoon, the Chicago sky was an unbroken sheet of gray with clouds hanging low, heavy as if ready to spill over. I was warming up chicken soup when the doorbell rang quickly, impatiently. I wiped my hands on my apron and approached the door. When I opened it, a surge of expensive perfume accompanied Bianca's icy voice. Standing behind her was a young woman in a gray suit, with sharp features and eyes cold as steel. I recognized her immediately. Camille Easton, a lawyer specializing in high asset divorces, someone I had previously confronted in a property dispute 15 years ago. I had come out victorious that time. Hello, Mrs. Hartwell. Camille greeted with a thin smile, her voice emotionless. We're here to discuss the future. Bianca said. She strode into the kitchen without hesitation and threw the thick stack of paper onto the wooden table, the cover bearing bold letters, Petition for Divorce. I looked down as steam from the soup mingled with the scent of fresh paper and ink, creating a sharp, suffocating aroma. This is a draft of the divorce, Camille explained, flipping through the pages as if demonstrating something. My client, Mrs. Bianca Cruz Hartwell, requests an equal division of the house, monthly support, and full custody of Lily. Nathan entered from the living room, leaning heavily on his crutch. His face turned pale. Split the house? He repeated, his voice strained, as if he had swallowed a stone. I had built that house. No, we built it? Bianca interrupted. But I live there. I contribute. And I'm not going to spend my life taking care of a. Her voice caught and her words fell from her mouth like a knife. My heart clenched. That word, spoken aloud, struck me like a blow. Nathan staggered, clutching the edge of the table tightly. I still remember my son's eyes when he heard his wife say that word. No mother forgets eyes like that. What about you? Have you ever seen a sentence that pierced your heart so deeply? Share it in the comments. Sometimes opening up is the only way to soothe an old wound. Camille smiled gently, her voice still courteous. We don't want to complicate matters, Mrs. Hartwell. If both parties agree, my client won't seek any additional assets. I lifted the documents and quickly glanced through them. The legal language spread out before me like a strategic battle map. I could sense the intent behind each line. I stated calmly that this house was purchased and titled prior to the marriage. According to Illinois law, it remains my client's separate property. There's no foundation for a division. Camille tilted her head with a slight smile. I acknowledge your legal expertise and I have respect for that. But I am certain you haven't overlooked the doctrine of commingling assets. When a house has been used as the marital residence over time, with investments or improvements made jointly, whether in money or labor, it can be regarded as a marital asset. She finished and cast a brief glance at Bianca, a subtle gesture of triumph. I inclined my head slightly, overwhelmed by that familiar blend of anger and lucidity. They were attempting to undermine Nathan's claim through a loophole intertwined with the same issue, a strategy I had witnessed many affluent individuals employ to strip assets from those most vulnerable. Nathan gripped the arm of his chair to keep himself steady. What are you saying, Bianca? We can. She turned toward him, her voice as cold and unyielding as stone. Don't you understand? I'm done. You're not the man I married. I refuse to live burdened. A sudden loud crash interrupted her words. Nathan had dropped his glass. Water spilled in streams, shards of glass catching the overhead light and sparkling. He bent down, but his hands trembled and his crutch slipped from his grasp. I hurried to catch him, while Camille grabbed her paper and moved backward toward the door. As if chaos was contagious, I looked up at Bianca. Do you really believe you can get custody of Lily after this? Bianca sneered. The court will decide, and I have a better lawyer than you, she replied with a smirk. That line transported me back to my courtroom days, reminding me how the most self assured individuals were often the ones on the verge of falling the hardest. I placed the papers back on the table and spoke calmly. Then let justice take its course, Bianca. But before that, I advise you to consider this carefully. Camille gently tugged at her client's sleeve and murmured, We should leave. Bianca adjusted her handbag, cast one final glance at me, and exited. The scent of her expensive perfume lingered in the air like smoke. When the door shut behind her, Nathan sank into a chair, his face drained of color. I crouched down to gather the shards. Tiny pieces pricked my fingertips, yet I felt no pain, only cold. Mom. Nathan's voice quivered. What did I do wrong for her to change so much? I looked at my son once strong and confident, now curled up like an abandoned child. I placed a hand on his shoulder and spoke softly. It's not your fault, Nathan. Some people only love when life is smooth. It's hardship that reveals who's genuine. He bowed his head, tears streaming down onto the back of his hand. I allowed him to cry. Some pain must be released through tears, or it will harden and destroy the soul. Once he calmed, I tidied the kitchen. The yellow light cast shadows across the table. The stew, dotted with water, had cooled. The air carried the smell of fresh paper. I washed the glasses and restored everything to its place. A small ritual to keep myself steady. That night, in my office, I opened old files. I remembered vividly. The house was purchased with Nathan's money before the wedding. The deed was solely in his name. I needed to find everything: receipts, contracts, bank statements, anything that could prove there was no commingling of funds. I worked late into the night, writing and calculating. My memory, the one people once called Mrs. Nothing, suddenly snapped back, sharp and cold like when I stood before juries. I devised a plan. Step one, review the deed, tax records, and material invoices. Step two, check recent renovation bills, mostly paid from Nathan's personal account. I remembered that. Step three, compare Bianca's credit card statements. Did she genuinely contribute to this house or merely spend on herself? I carefully logged each item down to the date. However, I knew that proving ownership alone wouldn't be enough to completely disprove Bianca's plan. I needed to understand her motive for wanting a divorce. Only one answer came to mind: an affair. Gossip from neighbors, restaurant receipts, unfamiliar perfume, secret calls. These were pieces of a puzzle. I had to assemble them into a story that couldn't be refuted. The problem was I couldn't do it all myself. I needed someone who knew how to follow leads and gather evidence without alerting the opposition. Someone discreet, who understood the law and, most importantly, owed me a favor. Leaning back and twirling a pen, a name from the past surfaced like a ghost: Darius Cole. I hadn't contacted him in over 20 years. Darius had been a private investigator I worked with on difficult cases. He could uncover the truth in details that appeared insignificant. Thanks to him, I once won a case that freed a woman from an abusive marriage and preserved her home. After that, he left the profession, moved to the western suburbs, and opened a small watch repair shop. I never imagined I'd need him again. But that night, with the wind rattling through the window and the clock ticking like a cold heartbeat, I understood I had no other choice. I picked up the phone, hesitated for a few seconds, then dialed a number I thought I had long forgotten. 3 rings, then a click. A deep, rough voice spoke low and smoky. Darius Cole. I took a slow, steady breath. It's me, Evelyn Hartwell. Silence lingered on the line. Then an easy laugh, tinged with surprise and a touch of sadness. I thought you buried my name with the past. Is this something serious? I asked, each word weighed down by gravity. Not just serious, but personal. I need your help one last time. A breath of resignation. Then Darius said, "Let me guess, justice again?" "No," I replied, gazing out at the raindrops beginning to splatter the glass. "This time, it's family." When the call ended, I sat in the dark, listening to the wind in the trees. Fear and determination mixed within me, sharp and intense. The real fight had just begun, and I, Evelyn Hartwell, refused to let anyone steal what my son had built with blood, sweat, and legs that would never be the same. 24 hours after receiving the call, I drove through Chicago's western suburbs to meet Darius Cole. His office was located along a strip of rundown storefronts, including a watch repair shop, an antique store, and a cafe with a faded sign. The glass door was cloudy but still bore the faint old lettering: D. Cole, Private Investigations. As I pushed the door open, the familiar scent of smoke and old leather greeted me, causing a familiar ache. Inside, under a warm yellow lamp in a small room, Darius sat behind a battered wooden desk. His white shirt was now gray at the collar, and he held a half-burned cigarette in his fingers. He squinted through the haze. "Evelyn Hartwell," he said with a crooked smile. "You still look like someone who's never taken a day off." I set my bag down on Saturday, both of us understanding that rest is a luxury we can't afford. He stubbed his cigarette and leaned in. "So, what is it this time from your voice yesterday? Sounds like more than just a case." I opened my bag and pulled out a few notes. "It's not, it's family." I told Darius everything: the accident with Nathan, Bianca's change, how she had started manipulating an 8-year-old to set up the court. I laid out details, words, expressions, everything I had observed. My voice grew rough every time I mentioned Lily's name. Darius listened intently, nodding, fingers tapping on the desk. When I finished, he sighed. She's building a record for herself: divorce, asset split, then custody. You're right. This isn't just betrayal. I nodded in response. I need evidence that is clear, legal, and heavy enough to make any attorney blink. She's cheating. I'm certain of it. I want you to find him and gather everything around it: photos, transactions, meeting spots, but Lily must stay out of it. No matter what, don't involve that child. Darius fell silent for a long moment. I understand, he said, pulling a small notebook from a drawer and jotting down a few lines. I'll start where the trails are simplest: credit cards, appointments, hotel cameras. Someone like Bianca, once she crosses that line, leaves a sparkling trail on her descent. I managed a faint smile, but it didn't lift the heaviness in my chest. We're old, Darius. I don't need a victory for my reputation. I only want to safeguard my home. You protected half the city, he said in a low voice. One small house won't be your downfall. We agreed. He would quietly follow Bianca and record everything. I gave him Camille Easton's card so he could identify the friends and fixes nearby her. Before I left, Darius shrugged into an old leather jacket and half joked, Last time I worked for you, I nearly got run out of town. Let's hope this one ends with a few pictures." "I hope so too," I replied, fully aware that a bigger storm might be brewing. 3 days later, a brown envelope arrived without a sender. Only a handwritten note. "Open when you're alone." I waited until Nathan was asleep and the house was silent, then locked my office door and turned on the desk lamp. The light illuminated the envelope, highlighting its creases. I opened it carefully. Inside, there was a stack of photographs, clear images taken at night, neon reflecting off wet pavement. In these photos, Bianca had her arm around a tall, gray haired man in a black suit as they exited the Lakeview Crown Hotel, one of those upscale places meant for executives and the wealthy. Both of them were smiling, faces close together. In the final shot, he held the car door open for her, his hand on her back, in an overtly intimate and almost brazen manner. Behind the photos, there was a packet containing round trip tickets from Chicago to Miami, high end restaurant bills, bank statements showing large anonymous transfers, and a membership card for an exclusive golf club under the name Preston Vale. I flipped through each page and my heart froze. I recognized that name. Preston Vale, a real estate businessman, had once made headlines for a series of scandalous romantic dealings. Darius had even scribbled a note in his untidy handwriting. Vale is infamous for sponsoring luxury cars, bags, and houses, which he then uses as leverage. When relationships sour, he deploys contracts and the law to reclaim everything. Calling him a man who exploits his lover's assets wouldn't be far from the truth. I set the photos down and tilted my head back, feeling the room suddenly grow oppressive. Bianca, the woman who once radiated happiness on her wedding day, holding Nathan's hand and vowing eternal love, was now willing to enter that ruthless game, ready to destroy our home for fame and money. I folded the photographs, slipped them into an envelope, and secured them in the safe. Nathan was not meant to see these. His heart had already been wounded enough. I knew that if he found out his wife was in another man's embrace, he would fall apart completely. I had to keep this secret, at least until I could turn it into a lawful weapon. That night, I reopened my notebook and drew an evidence map. Connecting details with arrows, the motive for infidelity appeared to be dividing assets, with a scheme to manipulate the child into lying. The plan aimed to force the child to lie in order to seize custody. Everything was interconnected like a precise system that could collapse if the right pin were pulled. I needed that pin. At the top of the page, I wrote 3 bold words: objective, the truth. The next day, I met Darius at the old cafe by the river. He arrived 10 minutes late, his coat soaked from the rain, but still smiling. "Told you this one's worth coming out of retirement," he said. He handed me another file, thinner but more surprising when I opened it. Inside were printed internal hotel emails revealing Bianca had booked under the alias C. Rivera, with a note that the payment was made with Vale's card. There was also a dinner bill from Le Jardin Rouge, showing a main course of double filet mignon and 2 glasses of French wine, totaling nearly $400. Oh. I found more evidence as Darius lowered his voice, mentioning the financial squeeze Vale was under. He had done this with at least 3 women, putting assets in their names before using legal means to reclaim them. I suspected Bianca was either the next target or an accomplice if she was aware of his schemes. I looked out through the rain spattered window, the city lights blurring on the river. A woman like Bianca would never be the victim, I murmured quietly. She was calculating. She believed she was in control. And you? Darius asked, lighting a cigarette. I don't gamble, I replied. I end it, he chuckled, coughing through the smoke. Still, the Evelyn Hartwell I knew. That evening at home, I rechecked everything. I had proof of infidelity: photos, receipts, plane tickets, irregular financial trails, transfers from Preston Vale, potential witnesses, hotel staff, limousine driver, golf club employee, evidence of coercing a child to lie, and the overheard conversation I recorded. I sorted them into categories, labeled each, and stored them carefully in the safe. Each time the lock clicked shut, the metallic sound struck me as cold yet authoritative, like a seal of justice sealing my resolve. I understood that what I possessed could potentially overturn the trial, but I wasn't prepared to act just yet. Everything had to be flawless, no loopholes, no easy counter-arguments. I sat down and compiled another brief list. Witnesses to subpoena included the Lakeview Crown front desk clerk, who managed the C. Rivera reservation, the Starline car service limousine driver who chauffeured Bianca in Vale, the Le Jardin Rouge manager who could confirm the reservation for 2, Mrs. Noser Davis, a neighbor who saw Bianca with the mysterious man, and if needed, Darius Cole, an independent investigative witness. Once the list was complete, I looked up at the family photograph on the wall. In it, Nathan was holding Lily on his shoulders, and Bianca stood beside him, her hand in his. Their smiles then shone brightly as if they could never fade. Now it was just the two of us, Nathan and me, trying to preserve what remained after a storm called false love. I rose, locked the office door, and turned off the light. In the darkness, the steady rhythm of the rain sounded like the city's heartbeat gradually slipping into sleep. Yet I remained alert, knowing that come morning, it would be time to bring this evidence into the light. Mask after mask would fall, exposing the true face of betrayal, polished, cold, and fou eat from within. On the first day of the hearings, Chicago was enveloped in thick fog. I recall each step ascending the courthouse stairs, the cold touch of granite through my heels, the scent of old parchment and strong coffee drifting down the hall, and the curious gazes that followed. Courtroom 3 was overflowing. Journalists packed the back seats, their camera lenses peeking over shoulders. I overheard whispers, "Is that her, Evelyn Hartwell, the defense queen from back in the day?" I didn't react. It had been ages since that name held any significance in legal circles. But fate has its way of pulling you back to your battleground. Only this time, I wasn't fighting for abstract ideals. I was fighting to keep my son's roof over his head. Judge Delgado entered, his black robe flowing quietly like a wave. An old colleague, cautious and principled, with a recorder's memory, was present. We exchanged a small nod and silent acknowledgement that this would not be an ordinary trial. Camille Easton, Bianca's attorney, then stepped forward. She stood upright, exuding confidence, and spoke with deliberate cadence, her words designed to evoke both sympathy and judgment. "Your Honor," Camille began, "this marriage is beyond repair. My client, Mrs. Bianca Hartwell, is a young woman in her prime, forced to care for a husband who is disabled and diminished both physically and emotionally. She is not asking for pity, only a chance to start anew and raise her child in a healthier environment." I sensed a chill running through me, word by word. Disabled. The word echoed twice more, within a span of weeks, this time from a stranger, spoken with the confidence of someone who believed they understood Nathan's suffering. Camille paused, her gaze shifting to my son. Nathan tried to stand to introduce himself. He leaned heavily on 2 crutches, struggling to maintain balance, his face tense with pain. A few feet away, Bianca offered a thin, sharp-edged smile. I caught that look, and a cold fire ignited within me. When Camille finished, I requested permission to speak for the defense. Delgado glanced at me with a flicker of surprise. Mrs. Hartwell, you are formally representing Mr. Nathan Hartwell. I'm filing the authorization today, Your Honor, I stated steadily. And as defense counsel, I request to proceed. Whispers circulated once more through the room. Many had gathered to see what the woman who vanished from the bar 20 years ago would do. I paid little attention to the gossip. What mattered was my son watching me with eyes filled with hope and despair. I opened my familiar leather briefcase. The sharp click of the latch cut through the thick, charged air. I retrieved a stack of documents and handed them to the clerk. The deed, tax receipts, maintenance records, all in Nathan's name, bought before the marriage. Your Honor, I stated this clearly, this house is not classified as marital property and cannot be divided. All funds used for its purchase and improvements originated from Mr. Nathan Hartwell's separate accounts, as evidenced by bank statements and tax records. There is no mingling of funds whatsoever, contrary to what the plaintiff claims. Camille interjected, saying, Your Honor, the house has been the marital residence for over 6 years. According to the commingling doctrine, separate property can be regarded as marital if there is evidence of financial contribution or substantial labor from the other spouse. However, that doctrine applies only when clear proof exists that the other spouse contributed financially or through meaningful work. We have detailed statements showing that every maintenance cost, repair, and property tax was paid by Mr. Hartwell, and Mrs. Bianca made no financial contributions apart from enjoying the property as a beneficiary. Delgado looked over his glasses and nodded slightly. Noted. Mrs. Hartwell, do you possess documentation to substantiate your claims? I asked, opening another envelope of receipts for the clerk. Additionally, I request permission to submit supplementary evidence within 10 days regarding infidelity and coercion of a minor to deceive the court. The room went silent. I noticed Camille's brow furrow and Bianca's fingers tighten around her handbag. She hadn't expected me to know. I kept my gaze fixed on the judge. Delgado tapped the gavel. These allegations need to be verified. I will allow the submission of additional evidence, but both parties must refrain from provocation or any actions that could affect the child. Understood, Your Honor. I nodded slightly. Camille turned sharply. Pending that, my client requests temporary custody of Lily to prevent psychological harm from living with an ailing parent. Nathan suddenly sat upright, but I placed a hand on his arm. I stood up, voice calm yet firm. Objection. Lily is emotionally balanced, excelling in school, and maintains strong bonds with both her father and grandmother. Separating her at this point would cause severe harm. We request shared, supervised parenting time equally divided between both parties, with oversight by Child Protective Services. Delgado contemplated this proposal, then nodded in agreement. This constitutes a reasonable temporary order. Shared care and visitation on equal terms. Neither party may restrict contact with the child until the final judgment is issued. I saw Bianca bite her lip, her eyes narrowing with determination, while Camille jotted down notes, calculating the next move. Nathan exhaled slowly, but I simply squeezed his hand gently. The conflict had been ongoing for a long time, and this moment was only the beginning. When the court session adjourned, the hallway erupted with activity, cameras clicking and reporters crowding in. A middle aged man pushed a microphone forward excitedly. Mrs. Hartwell, a word about your return after nearly 20 years. People are calling this the comeback of the defense queen. I paused for a moment, looked at him, and then answered deliberately. I'm not back to beat anyone. I am here to protect my loved ones and uphold justice, even if sometimes that justice must be awakened through pain. Silence settled for a moment before flashes erupted once more. I continued walking, not looking back. Behind me, I could hear whispers. She still has it, Evelyn Hartwell, as sharp as ever. Outside, Nathan was waiting, leaning against the car. When I reached him, he offered a faint smile. Mom, you really shut them up. I took his hand. They are only quiet for now, son. To truly win, we need the truth, and the heaviest blow is still in my hand. I said nothing more, but in my mind, I visualized the tiny USB securely locked in the safe, recording Bianca telling Lily to lie about not wanting to live with her father. When used at the right moment in the right way, that evidence wouldn't just undermine Bianca's case, it would reveal the grade and cruelty behind her polished exterior. On the drive home, I looked out at the cityscape bathed in the late afternoon light. The streets were as bustling as ever, but inside me, a rising tide of emotion was gathering. The battle had officially begun, and I, Evelyn Hartwell, who once walked away from justice out of disillusionment, was determined to prove that regardless of how the world changes, the truth always maintains its voice. A week later, the second hearing took place. That morning was unusually dim, and the air inside the courtroom was thick with anticipation. I sat at the defense table, my hand resting on a small silver USB, the most vital piece of evidence in the case. A part of me trembled not out of fear, but from a deep awareness that a single procedural misstep could cause the entire case to fall apart. Judge Delgado entered the room and nodded to both sides. Camille had arrived early, her face tense but professional. Bianca sat beside her in a cream dress, her gaze cold and her lips pressed into a confident line. Nathan was seated beside me, thinner, tired yet hopeful. As the court proceedings began, Camille presented additional arguments regarding Nathan's psychological instability following the accident and emphasized the need for Lily to live in a more stable environment. I listened carefully, detecting every faint flaw in the connection. When Delgado inquired, "Defense, is there anything to add?" I rose to my feet, the chairs creaked, and the room fell silent. I reached into my briefcase and removed the sealed USB drive. "Your Honor," I said deliberately and distinctly, "I present additional evidence along with an audio recording obtained at Mr. Nathan Hartwell's residence, which shows Mrs. Bianca Hartwell coercing a minor into lying before the court." Camille suddenly sat upright. "Objection, Your Honor. The source is unverified, and recording my client without her consent breaches her privacy." I met her gaze calmly. "Your Honor, the recording was made in a shared area of the home, where Mrs. Bianca Hartwell had no reasonable expectation of privacy. Moreover, the intent was not to invade privacy, but to safeguard the child's best interest in accordance with the Illinois child protection statutes." Delgado signaled to the clerk to take the USB and play it. My pulse remained slow and steady, then static, followed by Bianca's voice, cold and clear. "You must remember, Lily, when they ask, you tell them you don't want to live with your dad, okay? If you say anything else, they'll think I'm the bad one, and they'll take you away from me." Then Lily's voice, small and trembling like a gentle breeze, whispered, "But I love Dad. I don't want to lie." A soft slap sounded, and Bianca's voice grew firmer. "Don't argue with me. If you love me, you have to help me. Just say it, and you'll stay with me forever." The courtroom fell silent. No one moved. I heard Nathan take a deep breath, and Delgado lifted his gaze, locking it on Bianca. She had gone pale. She stood abruptly and screamed out, "I was set up. She manipulated my child. This is staged." Camille tried to steady her client, but her voice trembled. "Your Honor, we request the exclusion of this evidence. It lacks authentication and may have been altered." I rose again, my voice steady, sharp as a blade. "Your Honor, the audio originates directly from the family's internal security camera system, automatically saved with timestamps and verified by an independent technician. It also contains the child's voice, the individual directly affected. They said submitting this evidence is lawful and solely intended to uphold the truth and protect the rights of a minor." Delgado studied me carefully before turning to Camille. "Miss Easton, do you have any further objections?" Camille bit her lip and shook her head in response. "Very well," Delgado said firmly. "The court accepts the USB as lawful evidence with significant probative value in determining custody. I also order that Lily Hartwell be brought to court under the supervision of a child psychologist." The room stirred once more. Bianca sank into her chair, her face pale as paper. I saw Camille lean in and whisper something, only to receive a desperate shake of the head in reply. An hour later, the door opened. Lily entered, tiny in a pink dress, clutching a well-worn teddy bear. The psychologist placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Delgado's voice grew gentler. "Hello, Lily. Are you feeling scared?" She shook her head, though her big eyes were brimming with tears. "Do you know why you're here today?" "Yes, because people want to ask me about my parents. That's right. No one here wants to frighten you. You just need to tell the truth. Can you do that? Lily nodded and hugged her teddy bear. Then, in a small but steady voice that resonated through the silent room, she said, I love my dad. I don't want to lie. I don't want to choose between my dad and my mom. I just want to be with both. A long, breathless pause. I saw Delgado bow his head slightly, and a few journalists quietly wiped their eyes. Nathan covered his face, his shoulders trembling. Suddenly, Bianca leapt up, screaming. She accused the girl of claiming that Evelyn had planted it in her mind. I will sue you for invasion of privacy, she yelled. I remained seated, gazing at her calmly, almost impersonally. No, Bianca, I said softly. She simply expressed her genuine feelings. And you just demonstrated to this court that you are willing to sacrifice a child to achieve your own goals. Delgado responded with a strict order, his voice firm. I will not permit anyone to threaten or harm a minor witness. Mrs. Hartwell, he said, turning to me, the court acknowledges your efforts in presenting this evidence lawfully. The recording will be considered highly significant in the custody decision. The gavel struck 3 times, its echoes bouncing off the walls and filling the room like the pulse of justice itself. Camille lowered her head and collected her papers. Bianca sat motionless, her lips quivering, unable to speak. Her family, seated in the back row, kept their heads bowed, avoiding any eye contact. Nathan faced me, tears streaming down his cheeks. Mom, I can't believe it. Can I really get Lily back? I took his hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. Not get back, son. She's finding her way home. I paused there. Although I still possessed stronger evidence, receipts, photographs, and bank statements from Preston Vale, I chose not to submit any more. Not out of fear, but because the final blow had to be delivered at the right moment. Now the truth had spoken, and I wanted it to resonate pure and untainted by even the slightest spite. The hearing came to an end in silence. No one hurried to leave. It seemed everyone was still processing what had just transpired. I stepped outside and was immediately struck by a cold gust of air. In the corridor, reporters gathered, flashes flashed, and questions were hurled about. Mrs. Hartwell, have you truly returned? Do you intend to resume practicing after this case? People are calling this the rebirth of the defense queen. What are your thoughts? I paused, squinting against the lights, then simply offered a smile. I'm not back, I said softly but warmly. I'm just standing where I'm supposed to be, between the truth and a child who needs protection. The corridor fell silent once more, as if taking in my words. Then cameras flashed, capturing my walk through the whispers, shoulders squared, silver hair catching the glimmer of the ceiling lights. Standing on the courthouse steps, Nathan waited for me. He looked at me with a mixture of gratitude and astonishment. I rested my hand on his shoulder and offered a gentle smile. Sometimes we don't need to raise our voices to succeed. Simply allowing the truth to speak for itself is enough. Behind us, I heard the first faint drops of rain tapping on the cold stone steps. For the first time in years, I felt lighter. Lighter because justice, the thing I had once lost faith in, had just spoken with the pure voice of an 8-year-old child. I understood that the fight was far from over, but the scales had begun to shift toward the light. The third hearing opened with a somber atmosphere, unlike the previous two. Reporters crowded the hallway, lenses trained on the courtroom door. Everyone knew that today was evidence day, when both sides would present everything that could influence the outcome of the divorce. I arrived early, with only a few papers, carrying a black briefcase and accompanied by 3 witnesses, individuals whose testimony alone could alter the outcome. Delgado sat upright and tapped the gavel to signal the start. Camille wore her usual confident expression, but I noticed something unsteady in her eyes. Bianca avoided my gaze, her hands clenched tightly on her thighs, nails digging into her skin. I rose slowly and began to speak. Your Honor, I call 3 witnesses to clarify the relationship between Mrs. Bianca Hartwell and Mr. Preston Vale, whom we believe is directly connected to the motive for divorce and the property dispute. Delgado nodded. Call your first witness. The door opened, and a middle-aged man dressed in a hotel uniform entered. It was Ethan Morello, the front desk clerk from the Lakeview Crown Hotel. He entered gradually, slightly bowing, holding a packet of statements in his hands. I moved closer. Mr. Morales, do you recall a guest named C. Rivera booking a room at your hotel on March 17th? He nodded. Yes. The luxury room on the 12th floor was occupied by a female guest accompanied by a man named Preston Vale. Can you confirm they stayed in the same room? Yes, Mom. I was on duty at the time. They arrived around 7 p.m. and departed the following morning. The courtroom fell silent. I could hear the scratch of reporters' pens. Delgado signaled for me to proceed. Did you notice any behavior between them that was intimate or beyond a professional relationship? Mr. Morales glanced quickly at Bianca, then responded. I prefer not to say anything improper, but they did hold hands and laugh together. Mr. Vale called her sweetheart in my presence. Camille immediately stood up to object. Your Honor, this is subjective and doesn't necessarily prove infidelity. I then turned to Delgado confidently. We also have physical evidence. I pulled a large envelope from my briefcase and displayed the photographs. On the monitor, the images appeared. Bianca and Preston exiting the Lakeview Crown Hotel, hand in hand. Bianca was wearing a red evening gown, Preston in a dark coat with his arm around her waist. Then there was a shot at Miami's airport, capturing both the business class counter and a matching hotel bill from Florida. During the same period, Nathan was in rehabilitation, confined to a therapy center. I left the final image unstated. Bianca was seen receiving a gift box from Preston containing a diamond-studded gold necklace valued at over $8,000 according to an expert invoice from Varley Jewelers. I stated evenly that these photos were taken while Mr. Nathan Hartwell was in physical rehabilitation, in need of financial and emotional support. Meanwhile, Mrs. Bianca Hartwell, rather than caring for her husband, was spending her time and resources on outings with Mr. Vale. This constitutes betrayal and serves as direct evidence that the motive for divorce is not emotional breakdown, but material gain. Camille was quick to intervene. Your Honor, adults may socialize. Mr. Vale is a family friend, and these trips and gifts could be considered emotional support. I didn't respond immediately. I smiled slightly and produced a second file. If it's merely support, I pointed out, why funnel the funds through two shell companies? Delgado tilted his head slightly. Please clarify, Mrs. Hartwell. I moved to the lectern and retrieved the file. These bank statements indicate that, over the past 3 months, more than $120,000 was transferred from Vale Holdings via an account at Arden Consulting LLC, one of Mr. Vale's subsidiaries, to Mrs. Bianca Hartwell's personal account. The transactions are labeled as consulting services, but Mrs. Hartwell does not provide any consulting work. Camille intervened, saying, Nothing out of the ordinary. My client could have done freelance work, marketing, or design for Mr. Vale. I closed the file and looked directly at her. Then why hide it from her husband? Why, if everything was innocent, were the transfers divided into smaller amounts, routed through an intermediary, and only withdrawn in cash a few hours later? Delgado rested his chin on his hand, his voice steady but cold. A fair question, Mrs. Hartwell. He turned to Bianca. Could you explain why these transfers were kept hidden? Bianca stammered, her lips trembling. He helped me. I was struggling. It was nothing more. Delgado raised an eyebrow. Financial assistance between friends, I understand, but amounts exceeding $120,000 in just 3 months through a secret account. Do you consider that reasonable? Bianca remained silent. The room gradually returned to quiet. I could hear my heartbeat steady and firm. I pressed on. The court should also note that these transfers coincide with the period when Mrs. Bianca filed for divorce and was seeking half of the assets. This appears to be a deliberate pattern, exploiting her relationship with Mr. Vale to accumulate funds for a new lifestyle, which she referred to as financial freedom, in an email to a close friend we obtained. I paused briefly before adding, the ultimate goal, selling my son's house to free up cash for reinvestment. This isn't just marital betrayal, it's a coordinated scheme to seize property. Camille made one last attempt to object, her voice growing tense. Your Honor, we haven't examined Mr. Vale. He can confirm that these were genuine investments. Delgado glanced at the clerk. Has the court's subpoena to Mr. Vale been served? Your Honor, the clerk responded. All three attempts were unsuccessful. Mr. Vale left Illinois 2 days ago with no forwarding address. A soft rumble passed through the courtroom as reporters hurriedly jotted notes. Bianca lowered her head, her hands trembling. Nathan remained sitting, his eyes moist but notably brighter than in months. I took a deep breath. Your Honor, I said, considering this evidence and the potential risk of asset dissipation, I request a temporary asset preservation order on the Lincoln Park residence, which is legally owned by Mr. Nathan Hartwell. We ask for a provisional ban on any sale, transfer, or encumbrance until the final judgment. Delgado examined the file once more and nodded. He raised the gavel and enunciated each word distinctly. The court grants Mrs. Hartwell's motion. The property at the Lincoln Park address is now subject to an asset preservation order. Neither party was permitted to sell, mortgage, or transfer ownership in any form until the final ruling was issued. The cracking sound of the gavel echoed dry and heavy. A ragged breath escaped from Bianca's row. She bowed her head, with dark hair partially covering her face. Camille remained silent, her knuckles white as she gripped her pen. I sat still, my hand resting on my briefcase, feeling the tension in my pulse settle. Nathan turned towards me and took my hand. He didn't speak, only squeezed it in gratitude without words. Behind us, reporters hurried toward the doors, their phones chiming incessantly, and the headline flashed, Evelyn Hartwell flips the case asset freeze ordered in Chicago, all but guaranteed by afternoon. Delgado tapped the gavel once more and adjourned the session. I stood up, gathering my files. In my mind, the old voice that belonged to me from years ago, during my days as the defense queen, whispered, No power is untouchable, only unexposed. Now the light had reached Bianca and the man behind her, Preston Vale, and I understood they had no more places left to hide. Outside the courtroom, the sky had cleared. Thin sunlight poured over the cold stone steps, shimmering across the glass like a long blade of light. I lifted my chin and inhaled the crisp air. Inside, there was no thrill of victory, only the serenity of someone who had nudged justice back onto its rightful path. The conflict persisted, but from this moment onward, the board was mine. And for the first time in a long while, Chicago's morning felt truly beautiful. I thought that after the financial setback, Bianca would retreat to protect her reputation. I underestimated her arrogance. At the next hearing, as soon as proceedings began, Bianca suddenly rose, her eyes blazing, her voice strained yet defiant. Your Honor, she addressed the judge, then turned to face the reporters. Everyone praises Evelyn Hartwell as a symbol of justice, but the reality is she left the law not out of principle, but because of a humiliating defeat. Everyone is aware she lost that case badly, was exposed by her own colleagues, and then vanished. A hush of whispers swept through the courtroom. I saw Nathan turn pale. Delgado frowned but decided to allow her to finish. Camille, seemingly caught off guard by the turn of events, remained seated, her gaze lowered as if she wished to avoid witnessing her client's further decline. I rose, determined not to be swayed by emotion. Your Honor, I began, my voice low, steady, and unexpectedly calm. If revealing the truth about my past sheds light on the characters of those present here, I am prepared to share it. I moved toward the lectern, my fingers lightly brushing the old leather briefcase that had accompanied me through nearly 30 years of practice. Yes, I addressed the courtroom. I left the legal profession 19 years ago after the Richardson versus Stonehill Corporation case, a matter in which I represented the families of 4 workers who perished in a building collapse. They were poor, but I believed in justice, convinced that my evidence was compelling enough to hold the corporation accountable. I hesitated, recalling the scent of cement dust and the cries of widows. Yet the final ruling exonerated the corporation. Deep inside, I knew justice had been betrayed. I lacked proof. I refused to be a pawn in a corrupt game, so I walked away. Not because I lost, but because I refused to achieve victory through dishonesty. A heavy silence fell over the room. I opened the briefcase and removed an old newspaper, faded with age. Years later, the Chicago Tribune conducted an investigation. They discovered that presiding Judge Harold Whitmore accepted over $500,000 in bribes from Stonehill to manipulate the verdict. He was later sentenced to 12 years in prison. Here is a copy of that article. I can present it to the court if required. I handed it to the clerk and turned towards Delgado. He paused for a moment, then stood up, his eyes, once my junior colleague, showing unmistakable emotion. Your Honor, Delgado began, his voice deep and steady. I confirmed that at the time I was working under Mrs. Hartwell's guidance. She was the one who instilled in me the principles of professional ethics. Without her influence, I might have taken the easy route like many others. I have complete trust in her integrity. The room fell silent. The clicking of cameras ceased. Nathan looked at me, eyes shining with amazement as if he were seeing a different mother than the one he thought he knew. I offered a faint smile and turned my gaze back to Delgado. Thank you, Your Honor. I don't mention this for sympathy. I simply wish to say that I am not here to seek reputation or settle old scores. I am here for my family, and because this truth is worth standing up for one more time. Delgado nodded, respect evident in his eyes. The record will reflect your statement. I then shifted my attention to Bianca, who sat quietly, her face pale and eyes avoiding mine. The arrogance had vanished, replaced by confusion and fear. I didn't need to say anything further. The truth had already spoken. Perhaps sensing that the tide had fully turned, Camille rose and spoke softly. Your Honor, we request a brief continuance to review the evidence and prepare our response. I nodded. We agree, Your Honor. Delgado tapped the gav. The court is recessed for 3 days to allow both sides to supplement their filings. I sat down and gathered my papers. Nathan whispered to my mom, I never knew you went through that. I always thought you left because you were tired. I placed my hand over his and smiled sadly. No, son. I left to preserve something more important than a name, myself, and my respect. During those brief 3 days, I didn't take a single moment to rest. I devoted nearly all my time to scrutinizing the financial records, cross-checking every expense linked to Bianca and Preston. I brought in an independent expert, Nancy Kramer, a former IRS auditor. She meticulously examined the numbers, receipts, and the shadow accounts Darius had traced. You've organized this well, Nancy said, setting the file aside. I can confirm that most of Bianca's expenditures show signs of money laundering. Funds come in and leave immediately, leaving no clear trail. This isn't merely a matter of marital ethics. It could be classified as financial crime if the court orders an investigation. I nodded quietly and responded, We don't need to push that far. Demonstrating that she did all this for money is enough. Late one night, my phone rang. Darius. His voice remained rough as ever, but carried a hint of satisfaction. Evelyn, you'll want this. Preston Vale just cut the cord with Bianca. I froze. Cut the cord, I repeated, stunned. He had transferred all his personal assets into his sister's name, shut down any credit cards associated with Bianca, and changed his phone number. My source indicated he sensed an impending loss and intended to slip away from the scandal unnoticed. I leaned back, a mixture of relief and bitterness spreading through me. A man who lives off other people's money, I murmured, is always the first to run when the storm hits. Darius chuckled easily. You used to say justice doesn't have to shout, it just has to stand. Looks like it's standing again. Not yet, I replied slowly. The last round is when people reveal who they truly are, and you're about to land the finishing blow. I don't need to finish her, I added. She'll finish herself. Darius laughed softly and ended the call. I sat alone in my office, the desk lamp casting a glow over carefully arranged files. A chilly October draft seeped in through the window. I glanced at the small photograph on my desk, Nathan and me on his engineering graduation day. Our smiles shone brightly on that Sunday morning. I whispered to myself, a long-standing vow resurfacing. This time, son, I won't allow anyone to take what you truly deserve. Distantly, the church bells tolled steadily through the night. I closed the file and sensed a strange serenity. The storm was approaching, but this time I was holding back the reins. That morning, Chicago's sky was overcast, and the first winter wind cut through the courthouse steps as if the weather itself was holding its breath. Courtroom 3 was filled to capacity. Neighbors, Nathan's old friends, and strangers who only knew the story from the news were all present. At the back, reporters had their cameras ready, lenses aimed at the bench. I entered carrying my familiar briefcase. Nathan walked slowly beside me, still on crutches, but his eyes shone brighter than ever. Lily sat in the last row with the psychologist, clutching her old teddy bear, the small symbol of hope she had held onto throughout the hearings. Bianca was already present, dressed in a black suit with carefully applied makeup that looked pale underneath. Camille sat beside her, composed, yet her fingers nervously fidgeted with a pen, as if bracing for something to fall apart. When Delgado entered the room, everyone rose to their feet. The atmosphere was heavy, thick with silence. No one spoke and no one took a deep breath. Delgado took a seat and gently tapped the gavel. The People's Court of the State of Illinois is now in session for the sentencing hearing in the divorce case between Mr. Nathan Hartwell and Mrs. Bianca Hartwell. I stood and approached the lectern one final time. My voice was not loud, but it was clear, steady, and unwavering. Your Honor, throughout these proceedings, we have presented a consistent chain of evidence, including ownership documents and financial statements, along with witness testimony, demonstrating that the home in Lincoln Park is the separate property of Mr. Nathan Hartwell, acquired and titled prior to the marriage, with no mingling of assets. All costs related to repairs, maintenance, and improvements have been shown to originate solely from Mr. Hartwell's separate funds. Therefore, Mrs. Bianca's request to divide the property lacks any legal foundation. I paused briefly, glanced at Delgado, then resumed, lowering my voice. Moreover, the record clearly reflects a pattern of deliberate actions by Mrs. Bianca Hartwell, including an affair with Mr. Preston Vale, receipt of suspicious financial transfers, and coercion of a minor to lie in court to gain custody and seize property. These actions not only breach marital ethics, but also pose a threat to the child's emotional well being. I shifted my gaze to the back row where Lily was seated, her eyes wide and glistening. Your Honor, I addressed him, I'm not seeking victory. I'm asking for justice for a child who was compelled to lie. A hush fell over the room. Delgado tilted his head slightly, a rare flicker of emotion crossing his face. He nodded subtly before speaking. Thank you, Mrs. Hartwell. Does the plaintiff have anything to add? Camille rose, but her voice now lacked conviction. Your Honor, my client believes. There's no need, Delgado interrupted gently but resolutely. The court has thoroughly reviewed the case record. He lowered his gaze to the thick stack of documents before him and began to read the verdict. Each word resonated clearly, coldly, impartially, like metal striking stone. After examining the entire record, the court grants the divorce petition filed by Mr. Nathan Hartwell and Mrs. Bianca Hartwell. Based on verified ownership documents, financial statements, and corroborated testimony, the court concludes that the house in Lincoln Park is the separate property of Mr. Nathan Hartwell, who is not part of the marital estate, retains full ownership rights concerning custody of the minor child. In the best interest of the child, the court grants joint guardianship to Mr. Nathan Hartwell and Mrs. Evelyn Hartwell. Mrs. Bianca Hartwell is allowed to visit her daughter Lily twice a month under the supervision of a social worker. Her requests for financial support, including periodic alimony and division of assets, are denied due to lack of legal grounds. The court also observes that Mrs. Bianca Hartwell made deceptive statements during her testimony and will forward the relevant case file to the prosecutor's office for further investigation. The gavel sounded once more, reverberating through the quiet room. Almost immediately, Nathan's sobs broke through the silence. He lowered his head onto my shoulder, his shoulders trembling. Mom, we won, he whispered. I embraced my son, overwhelmed by a mixture of relief and pain, not because of victory, but because reaching this day had cost us so much time, tears, and a faith once shattered. Lily hurried over and wrapped her arms around both of us. She hiccuped through her tears. Grandma, Daddy, can we go home now? I nodded softly, placing my hand on her hair. Let's go home, sweetheart. Our house is still there. A small round of applause arose from the back, initially just a few neighbors, then the entire courtroom stood up. Not out of curiosity or excitement, but because justice had finally been restored. Across the aisle, Bianca jumped to her feet and screamed, "It's not fair! I can't lose everything like this! I'll appeal!" This court was biased against her. Camille hurried to pull her client down, trying to calm her, but Bianca yanked her arm away, eyes wild. She ruined me. Evelyn Hartwell, you destroyed my life. I looked at her for a moment before speaking softly. No, Bianca, you did that yourself when you chose lies over the truth. Delgado brought the gavel down forcefully, voice firm, issuing an order. If Mrs. Bianca refused to comply, she would be removed from the courtroom. Camille lowered her head and whispered something to her client. Finally, Bianca sank into her seat, her eyes vacant. I observed her shoulders tremble, not with anger now, but with despair. Her family quietly gathered their belongings, avoiding everyone's gaze. As they exited, the hallway echoed with whispers of pity and contempt, but no one believed any more in the sympathetic image Bianca had once portrayed. Nathan turned to me, his expression softening. Mom, he said softly, I don't know how to thank you. I smiled and placed my hand over his chest. You don't owe me anything. I merely did what a mother must do. Delgado collected the files, then looked at me. His eyes were no longer those of a judge addressing counsel, but of an old friend, filled with genuine respect. Mrs. Hartwell, he said, justice may be slow, but it never sleeps. Today I am honored to see it awaken once more under your hand. I bowed my head. Thank you, Your Honor. As we exited the courtroom, a cold wind struck our faces with an unfamiliar sharpness. Dry leaves swirled beneath our feet. Pale sunlight filtered through the gray clouds. I lifted my gaze to the towering building behind us. This was the place that once inflicted enough pain to make me abandon my career. Now it was the place that brought closure to a circle of justice. I felt no triumph, no victorious joy, only a deep sadness. I was sad for Bianca, someone who had everything but opted to lose herself to greed. I mourned for people like her who believe that money can buy anything, even a conscience. Nathan clasped my hand tightly. Lily walked between us, her small hand clutching both of ours. She looked up and softly asked, Grandma, we don't need court anymore, right? I smiled and kissed her forehead. That's right, sweetheart. Now we only need love. As we descended the stone steps, I understood that justice, even if it sleeps long, will always awaken in the light of truth. November moved by at an unusually slow pace. After the hearing, the press roared for a week before falling silent, as if the entire city collectively exhaled. Meanwhile, in a different part of Chicago, a woman was bearing the consequences of her own decisions. Preston Vale disappeared from the scene. Accounts, companies, phone numbers were closed or reassigned. Bianca was left completely alone. I heard from Darius. She moved into a rundown apartment on the south side and sold most of her jewelry to cover legal expenses. The people who used to flatter her now avoided her, afraid to be associated with a name that had become a symbol of deception. As for me, I chose not to look back. No resentment, no gloating, just a small pity for a woman who had everything: a family, a daughter, a home, yet exchanged it all for superficial glitter. In the days following the storm, I returned to what truly mattered: healing. Nathan still had daily physical therapy. I accompanied him to the center, sat in the brightly lit waiting room, listened to gentle music and the rhythmic rolling of wheelchair wheels on wooden floors. How do you feel today? I inquired. Nathan offered a faint smile, beads of sweat glistening on his forehead. A little better than yesterday. The doctor says a few more months and I might be able to ditch the crutches. I nodded gently. One step at a time, son. Every step is a victory. Every evening when we returned home, Lily would dash to the door, clutching her messy drawings from school. She would chatter about her classes, new friends, and how a teacher praised her reading. Dinner was filled with laughter once again. The aroma of baked goods permeated the kitchen, mingling with the sounds of chopping vegetables and a spoon tapping against a soup pot. I realized how long it had been since the house echoed with that simple, vital sound, the one that makes you feel truly alive. Some afternoons I would stand in the kitchen, watching Nathan and Lily cut paper for cards, sunlight streaming through the window and creating a golden streak across the table. It brought me back to when Nathan was small, his eyes shimmering the same way whenever I brought home a small treat after work. One Sunday afternoon, as I was watering the plants on the porch, Lily came out wearing my old high heels, the same pair I had worn at my very first trial more than 30 years ago. "Grandma, look!" she exclaimed. "I'm a little lawyer. I'm going to protect justice like you." She took a few unsteady steps, clutching a small notebook, her voice serious. "Your Honor, I present evidence that cookies should be divided equally among everyone in the house." Nathan and I couldn't help but burst into laughter. He watched his daughter with eyes filled with warmth and pride. No more shadows, no more bitterness, just the look of a father who had learned how to believe in happiness again. I watched them, and a rare full bloom of peace filled my chest. After years practicing law, I had witnessed countless cases, testimonies, and broken lives. But I had never felt justice so close as I did now, in a child's smile, a father's embrace, and the warmth emanating from that small kitchen. I whispered to myself, and to any unseen listener out there, that justice sometimes sleeps, but it never dies. It waits silently for someone courageous enough to call its name. That evening, Darius paid a visit. He brought with him a small wooden frame, within which was a photograph of me, Nathan, and Lily taken after the hearing, an image a reporter had sent him saying it deserves to be kept. He placed it on the shelf among old family photos. "I think," Darius said, "that this is a beautiful moment in Plains history, the end of my last job." I looked at the picture and smiled. As for myself, I remarked that perhaps it was time to put this briefcase aside. It had been through enough battles with me, and now what next? He asked, a little curious. "All right," I replied softly. "Maybe I'll write it all down, not to boast, but to remind those who come after. Don't let justice sleep for too long." Darius chuckled, his eyes marked with age. "I hope I get to read it," he said. "I also believe that a new generation will learn something from Evelyn Hartwell." When he left, I remained by the window. Outside, the sunset bathed the small garden in a warm, golden glow. Nathan was helping Lily replant the lavender, her laughter ringing like wind chimes. I sat at my desk and opened a fresh notebook. On the first page, I penned the opening line of a future memoir. I once believed that justice resided in the courtroom. In reality, it dwells in the hearts of those who choose honesty, who get back up after being knocked down, and who dare to believe in goodness. I paused, looking up with a light heart, the air clear around me. From afar, Lily ran toward me, her high heels clicking on the wooden floor, her hair flying. "Grandma, teach me one more thing." I laughed and opened my arms. "Well, okay. Today's last lesson." I bent down and gazed into her bright, honest eyes. "Lily, remember this. Truth is your weapon, and kindness is your shield. Carry both, and you will never fear injustice." She nodded, her face lit with a wide grin. "I promise, Grandma." I embraced her, feeling her small heart beat steady against my chest. Outside, purple dusk took the place of the sunset. In the warm glow of our home, laughter spread far and wide. The sound of a family that had endured hardship and discovered peace once more echoed softly. I understood our story, the tale of three Hartwell generations, not concluded with victory, but with a renewal of faith. That morning, I brewed a cup of hot tea, the aroma of licorice wafting through the kitchen. The morning sun filtered through the maple leaves outside, casting gentle golden light across the table. The house was so still, I could hear the wind at the window and the tapping of sparrows on the eaves, tiny sounds I had overlooked for years. In the yard, Nathan took his first steps independently, without crutches. He concentrated, breathing heavily, sweat beading on his forehead. Lily stood nearby with a stopwatch, her voice clear and ringing out. 1, 2, 3. "Daddy, you did it." Nathan laughed and spread his arms wide, and she flew into his embrace. From the porch, I watched with a swelling sense of pride and gratitude that I could hardly put into words. All the pain, all the struggles had been for this simple moment, and father standing, a child laughing, and a home still full of warmth. Ives that small stories can comfort even the biggest hearts. That afternoon, as the sun sank behind the buildings, I reclined in my wooden chair, observing my father and daughter playing in the yard. A gentle breeze brought the scent of freshly baked bread and the sound of a child's joyful laughter. I closed my eyes, smiled softly, and thought to myself, we cannot alter the past, but we can teach our children to discern truth and kindness. That is how the future is shaped. Thus, my story ended amid sunlight, laughter, and the conviction that justice, though it may rest, will forever be stirred awake by hearts that refuse to remain silent. Two photos, two eras, one silent message, never surrender. I closed the album, my hand resting for a long time on its well worn cover. I understood that the greatest victory of my life was not Delgado's ruling, nor the applause that day. The real triumph was reclaiming my voice, the voice of a mother, a woman, and a person who refuses to stay silent in the face of injustice. I took a sheet of paper and penned a small letter to my younger self. Dear Evelyn, the one who trembled as she walked out of court in disappointment. Do not be afraid. Do not regret. One day your son will stand tall and your granddaughter will call you a hero. Believe it, because faith is where justice begins. I folded the letter and slipped it into the old briefcase, the one that has carried me through nearly every fight of my life. I ran my hand over its worn surface and smiled. Perhaps it's time to let it rest. But I also know that if someone needs it, if justice once again slips into forgetfulness, I will open it once more. The oven timer rang in the kitchen, bringing me back to the present. The aroma of butter and cinnamon filled the house. A small cake, golden with a gentle crack on top, was cooling on the counter. I placed it on the table and set three tiny candles, not to celebrate victory, but to thank the kindness that still lingers. Nathan stepped in from outside and leaned on the doorframe. What are we celebrating, Mom? I smiled, that the wounds have healed inside and out. He held my gaze for a long moment, then nodded. Lily ran over and hugged my waist. Grandma, today let's win forever. I laughed and whispered, ah, yes, sweetheart. But this is a victory for kindness, not for hate. Thank you for staying with me until the end of my story. I know this journey was long and filled with pain, but if you're hearing my voice now, it means you still believe in goodness and still want to see justice revived in places that seem silent. I genuinely want to know where you're listening from. Which city, which country? Leave a comment with your thoughts or your own story. I promise to read every line just as I once examined every case file with great respect. If you feel this journey was worthwhile, please like, subscribe, and stay for the stories ahead. Every moment you remain, every word you share is the warmest gift for a grandmother like me, someone who still bells. Ives that small stories can comfort even the biggest hearts. That afternoon, as the sun sank behind the buildings, I reclined in my wooden chair, observing my father and daughter playing in the yard. A gentle breeze brought the scent of freshly baked bread and the sound of a child's joyful laughter. I closed my eyes, smiled softly, and thought to myself, we cannot alter the past, but we can teach our children to discern truth and kindness. That is how the future is shaped. Thus, my story ended amid sunlight, laughter, and the conviction that justice, though it may rest, will forever be stirred awake by hearts that refuse to remain silent.